Name?
David Bowie.
Rock star or somebody impersonating a rock star? What's the difference?
Hello and welcome to this living room event brought to you by Curzon Home Cinema. If you're watching this live, you can join the conversation in the comments box or via Twitter with the handle @CurzonCinemas, and please use the hashtag Stardust. Stardust imagines what took place during a road trip made by David Bowie in 1971 across the US, shortly after the release of his album, The Man Who Sold the World. And here to talk about their film is director and co-writer Gabriel Range and lead actor Johnny Flynn. Hello, both.
Hi.
Hi. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having us.
Gabriel, I want to start with you about how the idea for the film originated.
So I had written another movie about David Bowie that was actually about a different chapter of his life altogether, that was about the time he spent living with Iggy Pop in a flat in West Berlin together in 76, 77. That was a kind of complicated film to put together from a rights point of view, particularly. And then I was told that Salon had a project that they were looking at this road trip, obviously in 1971. Chris Bell had written a screenplay around this first trip, David's first trip to America. And so, that was something that I then, I thought it was a great framing device for this chapter of his life. And it was, I guess it's a sort of, given how extraordinarily famous Bowie is, it seemed remarkable to me how little people seem to know about this chapter of his life. And, that sort of, who he was before any of those famous kind of persona, that we all know and love.
I think that is something that's really interesting with this film. Obviously, the period you were talking about in Berlin, you've got that his persona is very fixed around Low and Lodger and Heroes. But here you've got someone who's in the public eye, but their persona is not quite realized at all. And I guess that, in a way, as a filmmaker and as a writer, and with you, Johnny, as an actor, that kind of gives you a lot more license to play with it, I guess.
Yeah, I would say, I mean, yeah, he's obviously, like you say, he's a very well-known figure, but he's particularly well-known after 1972, 73, and there's a lot more footage of him once he becomes this sort of success story. And prior to that, he's running on a series of kind of novelty singles, and one or two did okay. And even Space Oddity was the anomaly in that run of kind of slightly weird singles. And it seemed like he was definitely trying different things, but not really landing with anything that felt confident enough to kind of pursue or galvanize into a kind of artistic movement for himself. And so it's an amazing time to consider him and think, like, be in those shoes and think, what am I trying to do? Like, what's my voice? What's my role? What's my reason to be? And it's amazing, kind of fortuitous as storytellers to find this trip to America where everything right at the kind of crossroads of these decisions and these discoveries, and the moment that he hears Iggy Pop for the first time, and he's just discovering Andy Warhol and some of the kind of avant-garde New York art scene, and the music that Ron Oberman introduced him to, which we know a bit about, and there's a lot of license in that bit of the story. But this is a story, so you have to conflate events, because it's he was on the road for a couple of months or whatever, and it's nice to kind of bring the best elements together, and yeah, so yeah, it's an imaginative version of that time. And like you say, there's license. It's funny because I played Albert Einstein in a series, and I found that really liberating because everybody knows him from the point at which he won the Nobel Prize, and his hair was kind of grey and scruffy and wild, and he looked like an owl. But before that, it was like there's just a couple of photographs, and well, it's not quite true of Bowie. There's a bit of footage of him and clips and stuff, but there's a lot less before this point in 1972, 73 when Ziggy emerges, and around and Hunky Dory in that period when he starts to be much more kind of solid in his artistic voice. So I found that liberating, and in my feeling of what I wanted to do, it was never and what Gabriel and I discussed and what he encouraged me to sort of feel was not to try for this kind of carbon copy of Bowie, because we all know that theatre and cinema is a sort of storytelling conceit, and we know in some part of our consciousness that these are actors and this is a screen, and so it's better to channel the essence of somebody, the soul of somebody in that situation, rather than try and meticulously do this impersonation of somebody which might be soulless. And also the more meticulous, the harder you try to kind of get everything right, the more people are likely to pick holes in it. And this is always going to be Johnny Flynn channeling Bowie. It's never going to be a replica of Bowie. So that was my approach.
I think one of the striking things about that time is just how you can really see him sort of searching for this identity. You can really see him kind of trying out different things. Whether it's the whole Anthony Newley sort of cheeky chappy thing, or the sort of his interest in Jacques Brel, the sort of chanson, all of that sort of. And I think in the few sort of clips that are around, either radio recordings or film clips from that time, you get a real sense of somebody who is quite uncertain, who hasn't sort of quite figured out what he should be just yet, and what kind of artist he is. And so I guess one of the things that was so exciting about meeting Johnny and talking about the project was just knowing that that was something emotionally Johnny could connect with as a musician.
Yeah,
that was one of the things that really fascinated me, Johnny. How much of your role as a musician and a musical performer, in contrast with your work as an actor, came into play with this? Because I know people say it's all performance, but it strikes me it's a very different kind of performance.
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously, I really enjoyed the it's really me singing and playing, and I loved the scenes. I guess I feel pretty comfortable on a stage with a guitar, and that's what he's doing. And I also I emotionally know what it's like to turn up and be a bit scared at immigration because you haven't got the right visa or whatever, and even though it comes through a different emotional filter through character, it's still that raw kind of emotional memory is obviously really helpful. You have Daniel Day-Lewis locking himself in a cupboard and getting people to throw cold water on him for days, and I've sort of done that bit because I in my early 20s and mid 20s I was we were giving guitars to other bands that we knew were playing at festivals that we were trying to get to in America because we couldn't afford the visas, and we didn't want to be going through the immigration carrying guitars and drums and stuff. And just that thing of turning up, especially the first couple of times you go to the States, it's so overwhelmingly big, and it's big and scary, even if you can play gigs and do and have the paperwork and stuff, but turning up and only being able to do the kind of shitty kind of corporate things and little radio stations and stuff, like I've done all of that, and it can really erode your confidence and your sense of like, why did I get into this, and turning up at the Amazon offices to play to office workers on their lunch break so that they know what, they can put a face to the name when they put the CDs in packages and things like that. And you go to places like South by Southwest and you have to go and play in a hotel lobby to to, you know, it's the same stuff that we had in the film. So so I emotionally knew all that stuff, which was really helpful, and just the sort of the spirit of trying to connect to an audience is, you know, something that I'm exploring all the time in a musical capacity as well as an actor. So it was a good crossover for me.
Plus, you also get to wear some fabulous outfits.
Yeah, that helped. I loved that side of things. I'm quite relatively demure in my everyday wear, so I like being a bit more flamboyant.
I mean, just thinking about both of you in the writing process, Gabriel, directing the film, and with you actually playing Bowie, Johnny. Did you both have that kind of moment? Go, okay, we know what we're doing. We know what we want to do, what story we want to tell. But did you, at the same time, did you have that sort of holy shit moment? I am actually dealing with one of the biggest icons of popular culture of the last sort of 40, 50 years. Was there that sort of, every now and again, that kind of stop moment where you thought about that, or were you just so involved in the process and had everything worked out by that point? It was hunky dory, so to speak.
I mean, from my point of view, I think I read every single sort of biography available, and sort of really drilled down into this chapter of his life, particularly, and it's because it was all before that first flash of fame. It's quite easy to sort of just take him as this young man setting out in the world, and I think this is kind of it was quite liberating to do that, because I think if you had stopped to think about exactly what you're talking about, then you probably, you would have this holy shit moment. I mean, I think there's this sort of, you kind of feel sometimes that there's this sense out there that somehow you're not allowed to make a small film about a big figure, or a big subject. And I think that's a real shame. And so that was kind of, because that was what we sort of, that was, I think, we always knew, of course, that this was not going to be a greatest hits movie. It was not going to be a jukebox movie, that we wouldn't have his music, and that it would be a smaller, quieter film. And that was really liberating, that it was because it meant that we had the opportunity to focus on this very specific moment in its life, and not feel that pressure, of having to kind of map out this extraordinary life and all that extraordinary music.
And also sometimes that, I mean, there are so many examples with musical biopics where there isn't access to the music, but even thinking about something like John Maybury's Love is the Devil about Francis Bacon, where he didn't get access to the paint, sometimes it leaves you having to think outside the box. Well, how do we deal with that?
Absolutely. And I think, well, I mean, Gabriel and I, because there never was a question of getting the music. And I kind of, when Gabriel and I met, we talked about, from the beginning, we talked about the benefits of working around it, and what creatively it sort of forced you to do. And it's, for me, it's like, this is this, it's kind of an archaeological thing that you get to see somebody. We all know what the records sound like, but it's like what goes into Ziggy, and what goes, what's he about at this time? Like, what's he running away from emotionally, and what are his traumas and motivators, and in turn, just in response to that last question, I also, as Gabriel said, really, because you, as a character, as an actor, I'm not allowed to know what happens next in the story, so I tried to eradicate the kind of super, I've taken him down off the pedestal to be this flailing artist in 1971, and desperately tried not to think of the legacy of Bowie, because it's all before that, and tried to kind of keep him as just any other character. But then it's funny, the kind of oh shit moment has all been afterwards, because of course then you do this film and you're playing a character, and you feel, it's like when you meet somebody who's very recognizable or famous, there's about 2 minutes where you are a bit like, they're not as big as they are on the telly, kind of thing, and then and then you feel comfortable, you know them, and I was like, oh, I know this guy, and then we put the film out, and then again it's somebody on a screen, and people's reaction to that has been the thing to kind of deal with. And as Gabriel said, it's hard to kind of reconcile with people who think that there are certain things that just shouldn't be touched. I don't agree with that as a storyteller. I think I mean, especially with the respect with which we approach the subject, there was a right to kind of explore and to unveil things and be responsible storytellers.
Gabriel, on that subject, I've got a question from Pete, who's from London. He said, thanks very much, I really enjoyed the film. I didn't actually know a lot about this period of Bowie, and I have read some backlash from certain people against the film. Did you both expect there to be some controversy because of the way that people feel proprietorial about Bowie?
Yeah.
Yes, in short, yeah. I mean, I think, again, there was this, I mean, journalists obviously need to sell newspapers, and I guess, when it was first announced that we were making the film, I think Duncan Jones very reasonably tweeted that if we were making it, that we wouldn't have any of his music, any of his dad's music in it, which was absolutely correct and was always going to be the case. And for some reason, various newspapers reported that as, the singer's son slams new biopic or whatever, and so then there's this sort of just a thing happens among the sort of the loyal fans that of sort of outrage that someone might want to explore this man's life, and I don't know. I just don't think it's right that the only biopic, the only film about a real character that can be made is one that's made with the blessing of, his family or the estate, and I don't imagine David would think that either. So yes, we knew it was going to be controversial, but I think I think that the thing that was just so extraordinary to me, given how famous he is and was just how little people knew about his family background, about how, most people that I would talk to, unless they'd seen one of the very good BBC documentaries made about him, they wouldn't have even had any awareness that David had this history of mental illness in his family, or any awareness of the huge influence that his half-brother Terry had on him. And given his incredible fame, that just struck me as interesting.
And was Terry an element of a narrative that was there from very early on?
No, that was something which I developed over the course of several drafts, and it seemed to be important to me, or important to him at this point in his life, I think. I mean, pretty much every track on The Man Who Sold the World is about mental illness in some shape or form, and when that's so front and center of the album that he took to America in '71, that to me was really interesting. And again, his refusal to talk about that in interviews was real. I mean, that's something that came up again and again.
And obviously, the sort of moving between the UK and America allows us to see that, but we also have Angie Barry and Jenna Malone gives a fantastic performance. But I wanted to just ask a question about another member of the cast, Mark Maron, who plays Ron Oberman. Could you both talk about him, because he is superb in the film, and the kind of interplay between you and him, Johnny, is one of the film's strengths.
Yeah, well, I loved working with Mark, and was a fan of his podcast and his comedy, and I think right from the beginning of talking about that character, Gabriel had sort of Mark as the man for the role, and I.
Oh. I think Johnny's frozen for a moment. Perhaps if you want to carry on, Gabriel, and we'll hopefully.
So yeah, Mark. When I first read Chris Bell's draft of the script, I thought Mark Maron came to mind immediately. Having seen his character and obviously knowing and loving his character in Glow and so on, but also being a huge fan of the podcast and so on. And just, Mark came to mind, as did Jennifer Angie. And so I feel very blessed to have ended up with my sort of fantasy cast, really.
And was there a lot of improvisation with the scenes on the road, or was everything very tightly scripted?
No, those were all as scripted. Yeah,
yes.
They were all as scripted. But Mark had terrific energy and would give every scene another sort of dose of that sort of New York snark that he delivers so brilliantly.
I've got some more questions here that have come in, and unfortunately, Johnny coming back. He's just crashed out.
Yeah, but he's going to sign back in.
He's coming back in a moment. Jen from East London asked, David and Angie Barry's relationship was quite fiery. Did either of you speak to Angie about that period, or speak to Tony Visconti or anyone else from that era?
I didn't speak to Angie. And I didn't speak directly to Tony about this period either. I mean, I think Tony, again, the part of the sort of the series of choices that led to this period of his life and the way in which it was framed was kind of all about trying to just narrow it down to some of those central relationships, like David and Angie, David and Terry, and obviously this imagined relationship with Ron Oberman. And that we did take quite a lot of license with that. There is, in real life, Ron Oberman, I'm sure, didn't swear anywhere near as much as Mark Maron's character, and
I don't think you did in the script either.
I was much closer in age, in fact, to David. But but it's film. It's those are the bits that I guess we have taken license with.
I've got a question for Joe from Manchester. Johnny, I loved your performance in the film, and I also thought you were great in Beast and Emma. And I'm just curious, what attracts you to a role?
I mean, sort of taking in something, a question earlier, I want to take risks, and the reaction to the film being quite divided has been sort of vindication. That's pleasing for me, because I love things that provoke dialogue. I don't like playing it safe, and so in whatever capacity, a story, I think, has to be provoking dialogue, and characters as well can be talking points about morality and the human condition, and causing people to reflect on their own choices and the lives that they lead. And and I want challenges from the characters that I'm playing as well. I want to learn something about myself through playing a character, and so this story obviously is, it's really exciting. It's lovely for me to reflect on my own trajectory as an artist, and to kind of was lucky enough to be able to play David from 10 years older than he was in the story, which is great, because I'm looking back and reflecting on what it is to be a 24-year-old musician who's finding their way, and to recreate some of that stuff. And for me, it's a kind of ceremony sometimes, playing a character. There's a way, it's like you're holding sort of a constellation of aspects of yourself in a space, and looking at bits of yourself. And I mean, there's lots of things that go into choosing projects, and obviously working with amazing directors. And from the first moment that I met Gabriel, I felt like he was a true collaborator and a friend. I just knew that his vision for the film was so exciting to me, and changed my perspective, thoughts on what it would be. I was kind of a bit skeptical about a film about Bowie, and what he said to me when we first met, and continued in our friendship to say about the project, I just always found really exciting, and I hope we work lots more together. So yeah, it's lots of different things.
I've got a final question here from Annie from London. The Man Who Sold the World and Hunky Dory are my two favorite Bowie albums, so I was really happy to see an account of that era. Do both of you have a favorite period or album of Bowie's? So Gabriel first.
Yeah, it's probably Low for me because of Berlin, but and I love just all of those, the Berlin trilogy basically. But yeah, Low's probably number one for me. So 6 years later.
For me, it's this era. It's kind of Hunky Dory is my favorite record. I love that, you know, hearing artists on the like Bob Dylan in Bringing It All Back Home, when he's on the cusp of change, and you can just hear the seeds of something, and there's different arrangements coming in. And Bowie's the same in this period. So it's that birth of Ziggy and kind of doing something interesting. But it's so this period really.
Excellent. Stardust is now available to watch on Curzon Home Cinema. If you've not seen Johnny in Beast as well, that is also showing on Curzon Home Cinema, in which he gives another superb performance. And if I'm not mistaken, The Dig is coming out on Netflix, I think at the end of January.
I think so, yeah. I've been doing press for it, so it must be soon. Yeah.
And I would say you can find it online, but if you're interested in seeing some other work by Gabriel, there is a superb film that he directed a number of years ago called I Am Slave, which is a really, really, really powerful and sadly all too timely drama. It's worth catching. But thank you for joining us today, Gabriel and Johnny.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye bye.
Thanks.
All right. Bye, everyone.
Cheers. Bye, guys.